Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diamond H. Marty here. Thanks for joining in. I had a couple of requests to discuss grease, its use, what kind, what to stay away from, and what works best where. So, here we are. Uh, this is going to be a quick video. I won't drag this out very long. We just really wanted to go over the basics of grease. Grease itself, in general, is for something so simple, is a very, very complex subject. There is a running rule that goes something like this, that some grease is better than no grease. And that is true. However, you can get into a very deep rabbit hole the more you try to learn about the different greases and things. There's lots of greases that are not compatible with each other. They react different. They can cause problems. If you put two incompatible greases together, the reaction could be that the base oil runs out of one of them and leaks completely out, and the other one hardens up, or vice versa. There's so many weird things that can happen, and I'm not going to really go over that in this video. What I want to go over in the video is, let's just start with the basic functions of what grease is. Grease is basically a thickener of some kind. I'll go through the different kinds of thickeners here in a second. And then there's a base oil added. And the function of the base oil is to gradually release from the thickener to lubricate whatever the piece of equipment or whatever it's going into, to keep it lubricated over time. Additives are added to that mixture for different and various reasons, and it all depends on what the application is. But basically, the main purpose of grease is to lube joints or parts that move against each other, like bearings and bushings and metal-to-metal contact. All greases have a carrier oil or a carrier base oil, like I mentioned, and a thickener. Additives, the types of thickener and base oils combination and the additives there within all depends on the target use. Target uses, let's use the example of a door hinge and the Indy car or a Formula One car. You put grease on a door hinge, it basically moves very slowly. It's lubricating that hinge, the grease is, but it never builds heat because it's not fast moving. Indy car wheel bearing creates huge amounts of heat. Those bearings are anywhere from $600 to $1,000 a piece, and that they're especially made for racing. I'm quite sure they use a special grease in Indy cars. But my point is, there's a wide variety of uses for a grease. So it's not always, I get really irritated knowing what I know. I get really irritated hearing grease is grease. It don't matter. It does matter in the application. Application determines the product that you use in that application. Now, when you're talking about heavy equipment, tractors, skid loaders, skid steers, backhoes, you name it, dump trucks, whatever. They all use heavy-duty grease that's extreme pressure. The main two types of grease, there's basically two types. There's full synthetic, there's synthetic blend, and organic. I guess that makes three. And I should have said types of mixtures for base oils and thickeners. But anyway, let's run over the types of grease. Two of these I never heard of before in my entire life. A couple of years ago when I really dove into this. But the first one is calcium or calcium sulfonate. It has a lot better attributes than lithium complex, and that's the second one on my list is lithium or lithium complex. It's basically a soap base with lithium mixture. I'll go over the little details here in a second. And then the third one is aluminum complex. You may not, you probably won't ever need to use an aluminum complex. Especially if you're watching this video, I doubt very seriously you'll ever need to buy aluminum complex grease. But it does have its functions, even in the automotive world, the industrial world, construction, and yes, farming. But the needs for an aluminum complex are just very specialized. The next one is barium complex. That's one of the ones I had never heard of, barium complex grease. Barium complex is very, very expensive, and it's used in specialized uses like the aeronautical world and aviation, space, travel. From what I understand, barium grease is used in anything going outside the Earth's atmosphere. For non-extreme pressure grease, that's probably the best grease you can ever buy. But it's ignorantly expensive. Like, we're talking anywhere from $40 to $85 a tube. So I won't be putting that in my tractor, I'll assure you. The next one on my list is bentone clay, or just clay grease with a clay thickener. I have and use some clay-based grease, and I'll get to that in a little bit. The next one is polyurea. John Deere is really big in recommending their tractors and equipment to be lubricated with polyurea grease. However, polyurea is not compatible with anything else. Throw that little tidbit in there. The last one on my list is sodium grease. That's an odd bird right there. And again, most of you, including myself, I don't think I'll ever need sodium grease, but it has its place. It's like an extreme grease. So just to cover some of the things that we will use for your tractors and equipment, let's just start out with calcium sulfonate. That's a very popular and relatively inexpensive grease to use. You would choose calcium sulfonate if you need a high water resistance that won't break down in the presence of water and resist water, and it also will provide extreme protection and rust in water conditions. It also has a very high drop rate. All greases have a drop rate. They're heated And as soon as the amount in the test, I forget how many grams of grease they use, but reaches a certain high temperature and it drops off the piece of equipment holding it. That's where they determine the drop rate. Um, the next, probably the most common uh, grease is lithium or lithium complex. It's uh, it's relatively inexpensive, but it's getting more expensive because of lithium. It's a little bit harder to come by these days, and getting more expensive to gather lithium. But it is a little cheaper than calcium sulfonate. However, lithium complex is like a in between as far as protection, and it doesn't do anything great. It's sort of like it does several things well. Okay, I guess that's the best way I can put it. Um, Really, calcium sulfonate has the advantage over lithium complex in every way. It's basically superior in every way except for if you have a centralized pumping system, like if you have a big, large farm and you buy your grease in 30-pound tubs and you have a pneumatic greasing system where all the grease in your whole entire shop comes from a barrel and it goes throughout your shop to the work bays or whatever. Calcium sulfonate doesn't pump as well as lithium complex, but it does just about everything else better than lithium complex does. Uh, another another comparison. I'm looking at my notes here so I wouldn't forget. Another comparison between calcium sulfonate and lithium complex is the water resistance is much better. Remains very stable in water. And lithium complex is good, but it also can be less durable due to the additives put in there. Because lithium complex by itself has to have help with the addition of additives. The rust protection is more superior in the calcium, and it has good in the lithium. The mechanical stability has a very high shear rate in calcium, and it's a good shear rate in most lithium and lithium complex. I'm stepping all over my tongue here. Uh, Calcium has a very high drop rate, and depending on the brand and the mixture, lithium complex can have a high temperature capable, but it has to have the right additives in combination to do that function, to be high temperature rated. Not all lithium greases are do well at high temperature. Almost all of them will, but let's just say some are better than others. The cost is a little higher. I think I mentioned that on the calcium due to the thickener production of the thickener, but the supply is much more stable. And lithium complex can be a little bit getting more expensive because the stable is getting less. Supply is getting less stable. Wow, I can't talk. Clay based. Let me hit that right quick. I have two examples of clay based grease, both of them of which are from Hot Shot Cigarette. They came out with them last year. They are excellent greases for what they do. I used them on my loader for a long time. Uh, the only bad part about using clay is they're not compatible. Clay is not compatible with anything else. So if you switch to a clay-based grease, you will need to pump out whatever's in the piece of equipment. Like if you're uh, greasing your loader, you need to push the old grease out and make sure that the new grease coming through there comes out the other end, so you know that it's been pushed out. It's not the end of the world. I still have a test going on. On the workbench behind me is a container of Hot Shot Secret clay-based grease and lithium complex that I mixed together 50-50 just to see what would happen. I expected an oil bleed to come uh, to come out of that test where the base oil would separate from the thickener in one or the other, and so far it has not happened whatsoever. I'm sure that the scientists that determine that clay is not compatible with anything else has their reasoning, and it may be the fact that both of my greases that I did a test with are a full synthetic. That may have a very high reason why they did not separate or have any detrimental effects. But I did want to throw that out there. The biggest advantage for clay-based grease is it does not have a drop rate. It does not melt. I don't care how hot you get it. A clay-based grease is not going to thin out and drop. It's not going to melt. So if you have a really high temperature function that you need something like that, then that would be your go-to. I haven't touched on this yet, but almost all of these greases that I've already mentioned, except the really weird ones like barium and aluminum complex, all of those others can have moly in it, molybdenum, disulfonate. Let's just cut it short and say moly. The very best protection you can use to protect your equipment will have moly in it. Moly does an excellent job of protecting metal to metal contact, extreme pressure. It just that is the most superior grease that you can have is a 3% to 5% grease with 3 to 5% moly in your grease. Hands down, there's no question about that. The only thing I do not like about moly greases is the grease that they are normally put in has a drop rate, and in the summertime it will literally drip out of the bushings. I have tried 2 or 3 different brands, and every one of them did the same thing. During the hot summer heat, it would just get messy, and just I got tired of it. And I stay on top of the maintenance on my equipment, so I don't lag in the maintenance department on anything. So I made a decision to stop using moly grease and go to something else that provides the same protection, because I grease my loader and my grease fittings on my tractor, my mower, anything that moves or has a grease zerk. I do it on time. Personally, my loader gets, if I'm working in wet conditions, it may get greased a little sooner, but under normal circumstances, I grease my loader every 10 hours. And I just don't look at the clock and count it or whatever, but I look at those bushings and pivots during my walk around before I crank my tractor. Any of them. So I stay on top of my stuff, but my point is Moly grease has the best protection. It also has a secondary function of protecting you if you lax in the maintenance department about keeping up with your maintenance on and upkeep on your equipment. It leaves a dry film of molybdenum inside the bushings and fittings. That's another plus for moly. But uh, I have chosen my go-to. There's two different brands of grease that's all I use anymore on everything, from high-speed wheel bearings to loader bushings, and that is TRIAX Atlas 600 and Mobile Grease XHP 222. Both of them are blue. Both of them are lithium complex, and the grease stays where I put it. That's the best thing. Uh, it's very, very tacky. It goes in. It does. Both of them have a extremely high drop rate, and I have had zero issues out of using either one of those since I started using them about 6, 7 months ago. Now, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just telling you what Marty does. You can take this information. You can go do your own research on what brand you want or whatever. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to talk you anything. I'm just trying to fulfill my agreement that I would make a grease video and explain the differences in the types. So, if you're going to use grease in a high-speed bearing, wheel bearings like in your vehicle or trailer bearings, trailer wheel bearings, or whatever, you need to make sure that tube of grease says GC-LB. I always get that mixed up. Either GB or LB stands for chassis lube, and the other one stands for high-speed disc brake wheel bearings. I guess I should have looked that up, but I always forget that. But as long as you see GCLB on the tube of grease, or at least on the website of the manufacturer in the description of the product, you will be fine. Not all greases are compatible or will live long in high speed, high temperature disc brake wheel bearings. It will melt and it will burn up your bearings, and I don't want you going down the highway and lose a wheel because the bearing burn up. So just make sure that the grease you're using for the application fits correctly. I don't care what brand it is or what color it is. Speaking of color, this is a generalized statement, so don't quote me on this. But in my experience, color has been not a non-officially identified types of grease. Most of your wheel bearing greases or high-speed, high-temperature wheel bearing greases will be red, but not always. And most of your heavy-duty equipment type greases will be blue. Some are red. Like I said, there is no set standard for colors of grease. I have greases that are orange. I have greases that are amber, natural colored amber. I have some that are purple. I have some that are blue, and I have some that are red. I even have some that are clear. I guess you could call me a grease nut, but I like to experiment and test things like that. That's why somebody called me an amateur tribologist, which is funny. But just because a grease is a color doesn't mean it actually fits the application that you're trying to use it in. The label on that grease tube will tell you exactly if it fits that application or not. you can get in trouble by putting the wrong grease in the wrong thing. I've been lucky enough all my life not to mess up like that, but I've been a lubrication nut since I was a kid. I don't know why. I, I can't even begin to explain that one. But I've always been intrigued by engine oils and grease and gear oil and everything else. I just like it. I like learning about it, and it's ever changing. Imagine that. But anyway, that's really all I've got to explain. Just trying to hope I didn't oversimplify this or whatever, or get into too much detail. I tend to ramble on about things that I like talking about, especially tractors and lubricants. But if you have any questions, please make a comment. Put your comment in the comment section down there, and if I don't know the answer, I can find out for you. Or if I know the answer, I'll give it to you. But there's a lot more to talk about, but I'm sure you're tired of hearing about greases. So with that said, thank you for being here and thank you for watching, and y'all take care.